Hello, everyone out there. Looking forward to talking about this important topic today. My goal is to establish the importance of data management for natural resource management and introduce a few techniques to help you build a strategy. To do that, we'll go over why data management is important, the theoretical underpinnings. Won't spend too much time there, but we'll quickly get on to some practical process for building a strategy, and then techniques that you can use to start your own. These are techniques that we've developed through the years ourselves with our own work. Looking forward to hearing feedback, how useful this is to folks out there. So if you apply any of these things, let me know. And if you have any questions about this topic, please reach out. My name is Brian Knowles, co-founder and managing partner here at Sitka. My background is in software development, data management, and data analysis. Currently, I lead the development of the TerraTrack platform for implementation tracking, and the Marathi platform for adaptive management and project management at a design level. I have 15 years of supporting natural resource management programs, doing all kinds of data management tasks, software development tasks, working with many clients around the world at this point. And I have a strong desire to share the successful practices that we've learned to help improve natural resource management. I think a lot of good can be done by all of us taking better care of our data, helping us all achieve better outcomes. Sitka's worked with many programs like the ones here in our 9-year history. We are passionate about giving natural resource professionals exceptional software tools that help them get their critical work done. Over time, we have seen common patterns in data management practices. We'll see how these line up with your experiences managing data for your programs. Again, like to hear what people are trying out there and where folks are having challenges or successes, so please reach out with your story. In our experience, data management is critical for effectively managing natural resources. A survey we did in 2013 shows that data management is very important. Most folks use general purpose tools like Excel or ArcGIS. Those tools don't meet their needs very well, and important data is often lost. It's not a great picture. So we're looking for ways to improve this situation. What kind of data are we talking about here? The organizations we work with are focused on a set of goals at the center, and their data management activities around that goal that should be in support of achieving measurable outcomes. An example of a goal, are we reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfire? Usually described in terms of targets and desired future conditions in many cases. Next up is over in the Northeast here. In order to design the work that we're doing, we need to outline strategies and how they're supported by results chains. An example of this is to improve freshwater wetland habitat. We need to increase native plant species richness by ensuring native plants are not outcompeted by purple loosestrife. So that outlines a whole results chain. We'll go into that more a little bit later. Planning. This is where we get down to doing activities, working with partners, and figuring out funding. An example here is implementing the strategy of improved trail connectivity. Requires coordination with our regional partners to acquire key trail segments. Next up down here is implementing. This focuses on things like work efforts, scheduling, staff, volunteers, contractors, etc. And here in the Northwest, an example is the imminent bare root planting season, which requires management of dozens of contractors and hundreds of volunteers during the optimal weather window. Monitoring, are we seeing the desired outcome? This is where we get to indicators, measures, surveys, sites, and protocols. Example here is wildlife monitoring to document the breeding bird community's response to oak release work recently completed. So I'm sure you all have your own examples for these different types of data. You can start to think of those yourself. But these are major data management activities we come across frequently. All right. Next up, just want to run through a scenario here about managing natural resources over many years and the types of information that are generated from that. For this, we'll focus on a scenario from our backyard, and it's a life cycle of a new natural area. To start, we were lucky enough as an organization to receive this donated property in the center of this key riparian zone with an opportunity of restoring historic side channels for salmon habitat. The initial phase is to focus on knitting together key properties around the donated property so that we have a target area where we can make a difference and actually achieve the outcomes we're looking for. Our director gets involved defining the target area and figuring out the acquisition funding picture. Our legal team is involved to pursue the acquisitions and the easement agreements and gather the file cabinets full of supporting documents for that kind of work. Conservation scientists are key to do site visit reports and environmental reviews to understand the viability of the properties we're looking at. From there, we move on to a phase of conservation planning. What are we actually going to do with this property? What's possible and feasible? What kind of threats are on the property? What kind of things do we need to mitigate for? What are some of the planned activities and budgetary requirements that we would have to accomplish that work? And what kind of monitoring and key indicators should be put into place to help us know how we're doing? These are questions, obviously, for our conservation scientists and land managers. Eventually, we move on to long-term management and monitoring. This turns into a management site, and over time, we do many work efforts, perhaps a few each year. For example, interplanting, invasive removal. Also start to do monitoring to understand how things are responding to our activities. Here we get all kinds of folks involved, land technicians, contractors, finance leads, volunteers, etc. Ultimately, at the end, we do need to come up with performance measures about how we're doing. Taking all those pieces of information together that build up over the years, we often come across seeing them spread across many various systems within the organization. And the question that comes up is, how do you keep track of all of this? Not only are there barriers to sharing data between departments because of this, staff turnover often means institutional memory is lost. We also see that leveraging data from prior activities is difficult. And putting together performance performance reports can become time-consuming and inconsistent between reporting periods. Further, this isn't what we want to do for our day jobs. We really want to start to use this data as a strategic asset. And when we start to talk to our M&E folks, what they want to do is make sense of all this information. They want to turn the data into information and start to think of it in a cohesive whole. So if we are taking the action of restoring a floodplain and pursuing that strategy, how does that strategy actually affect the contributing factors and threats that we're seeing on our property? So for example, here is the strategy of restoring floodplain. A contributing factor, a result here is to secure landowner permission for restoration. Implementing riparian re-veg and connectivity projects addresses the threats of sediment dynamics and water temperature. And that results in improved habitat, target of side channels, and ultimately benefiting the Chinook salmon in the population we're targeting. Beyond just building understanding, we want to learn and adapt. So how do we start to learn from this information? One key technique that we've seen, and I know many of you work on every day, is managing performance measures. So given our results chain that's defined earlier, what objectives and goals are we going to track? And how are we going to put together performance measures that indicate how we're doing against those objectives and goals? So for our example here, a performance measure is length of river access allowed by landowners for securing landowner permission and restoration. Another one is area of connected functional habitat and side channels. That's one we can calculate from the acquisitions that we've completed. More complex performance measures that take longer to develop and are outcome oriented, for example, would be number of juvenile outmigrants and females to indicate how we're doing against the goal of reducing fish disease in the lower watershed. So given that scenario, let's talk about some of the theoretical underpinnings here. One of the ones we're very familiar with based on our work with Marathi and the open standards is adaptive management. In adaptive management, information is integrated and used to drive the processes within your program. And it's really about capturing and sharing learnings about your activities to help you inform improvements in future activities. At the core of this is information sharing. So you get to step 5 here, and it's all about capturing and sharing your learning and feeding that back into your next planning cycle. So it's important to understand and recognize the importance of using your data as a strategic asset to help in this cycle. Another framework we're familiar with is structured decision making. I'm sure some of you have come across this and have learned about this, if not used it. This methodology is effective when integrating the perspectives of various and diverse stakeholders. Again, though, we see iterative cycles of learning here, which requires effective use of your data assets. An example of this is the work that we've done here in the Northwest with the Columbia Basin Tributary Habitat Expert Panel. That's a mouthful, but it's a group that takes scientific and local perspectives into account in making decisions in prioritizing habitat restoration work in the Columbia Basin. Interestingly enough, there is the theory here of the knowledge pyramid, which is related to the prior 2 frameworks we just discussed. And this is taking reality, deriving data from it, so through monitoring or through capturing data when doing activities in the field, transforming that into information, generating knowledge from that, and then ultimately making wise decisions from all that work. And I like to talk about this as organizational learning. This is a well-known theory in the information management space, and one that we can leverage in our organizations to improve how we treat data as a strategic asset. Of course, that's all well and good, but there's all these great tools out there. And I'm here to tell you, for the work that we're doing, the latest, greatest tools will not solve your data management across all the concerns that we just looked at. Tools come and go. They need to work together to provide an effective platform for your work. Building a data management strategy helps you plug in the latest technology and have it serve your purpose rather than you serving its purpose. So this is an important reminder before we transition into the practical here, to not get distracted by shiny objects, fancy maps, or one-shot wonders in the tool space. You take control of how you deploy the tools and the information processing within your own organization. And I think a data management strategy is an excellent way to go about doing that. All right, before I move on, any questions so far? Damon.
No, I think you're doing a good job. No questions this time, but do feel free as the audience, if you do have questions, use the Q&A across the bottom of the screen and we will interject as appropriate.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so the to-do I'm giving you all is to start a data management strategy today, if you haven't already. I want to share this process that has worked for many of the natural resource management programs we work with. It's part of our data diagnostic service that we have applied with international NGOs, state and federal agencies, corporate sustainability groups, and municipalities, as well as local nonprofits. So we've seen this be effective in a wide variety of organization types. We like to focus on this being a lightweight, cross-discipline approach for developing a data management improvement plan for your program. It's grounded in your current needs, and it helps you iterate and get better, and lets your team share a vision of how you want to improve your data management. The steps start here with people. End of the day, it's most important that we focus on the people in our organizations to make sure that they have the tools that they need to get their job done. And that drives a large part of this process. From there, from people, we focus next on data over on the left. Data is the pieces of information that flow through your organization and ultimately end up in spreadsheets, tables, GIS layers, etc. But we like to look at those a little bit differently than just where they land in physical systems. We like to think about them logically as well and how they all fit together. So I'll go through that a little bit today. Over on the right is the workflow. How do people work together to get the work done? That's really incredibly important. These endeavors require coordination between a large set of people, and how work flows through the system is important to understand. So we'll go through techniques for understanding that. And then finally, we get to talk about systems. And we also always de-emphasize that initially to focus on the people, but systems provide a lot of leverage for improving your situation and how you're managing your data. So we ultimately get to that point. Outcomes from this process are a scope for your data management plan, a deeper understanding of your data providers and consumers, a list of user goals and tasks, your program's main workflow diagram and any other important diagrams that you want to draw up, a high-level map of your data space, an improvement plan, and then finally an improvement plan focused on the highest value changes in your systems. All right, I'll start running through this process. We'll dive into a few key techniques. And please contact me after if you'd like more information. I do have a packet that goes into more details on these steps that might be of interest. Okay, first thing, we do start with thinking about the scope of our data management strategy. This is important because this will help focus your thinking on the work you'll do during this analysis. And it'll help you figure out the critical areas to include when thinking about your data management plan. A good place to start is pain points or frustrations. Everybody has them. I'm sure that you've had a conversation in the last month about some difficulty with managing data. So you can just think back to those conversations over the last few months to come up with a starting point. When we kick off a data diagnostic with our clients to help orient ourselves and orient them to what's most important, these are some of the questions in these three areas that we ask about. The first one here is data collection. How efficiently and effectively is data managed in day-to-day operations? So if we think back to the knowledge pyramid, this is how do we translate reality into data. So an example of questions we ask are, do you think your workflows are efficient? How many of you have entered data in one system only to be told that you also had to take that same data and enter it in another system, and it doubles the time it should take to complete that task? Another one is checking data quality. Do you check data quality regularly? Or do you get to the end of the quarter and when you're under a deadline, figure out that the data is not clean enough for you to include in the report? Or you have to write a big caveat at the bottom of the report. So think about these questions. I won't embarrass anybody today asking for scores, but yeah, write down your score 1 to 10 here. The next area is data aggregation and analysis. This is about if you have ready access to your data for building reliable reports and providing information about your program. This is about, in the knowledge pyramid, this is about transforming data into information. Some examples of questions here are, can you compare summarized results year over year? Or does the data aggregation not work well or very consistently year over year? Another one is how transparent is the process to aggregate and analyze data? Or is it a black box and you don't really understand how it's all being pulled together because the system was written 10 years ago and nobody's around who understands it anymore? It's quite often a situation we see. So there's some other questions here you can think about to assign yourself a score. Next aspect here is data reporting and publishing. Can you leverage your data to build knowledge, and does it help you communicate your progress? This is about the transformation of information into knowledge. Questions to consider here are, do you trust the reports that you're looking at? Do you get funny questions from management, executives, stakeholders that are difficult to answer? And how well do your reporting and publishing solutions support business decisions? Are they at the right scope and scale? And do they support strategic planning in the right ways? This is really starting to get at how you turn this whole process into an asset for your organization. All right, with that, any questions about that? Well, okay.
Brian, one question that did come in is, like, let me kind of paraphrase it. As an organization, if you are experiencing some issues with, these different steps, what would be your starting point?
Good question. We'll get right into that momentarily.
Okay.
All right. The final step in thinking about the scope that you're going to focus on is thinking about which business activities you want to plan for here. This is, aside from just the aspects of data management, this actually starts to focus on the content of which activities we should explore. And this starts to inform you of which people you should go start to talk to. The trick here is if you set your scope too narrowly, improvements can be difficult to find. So if we just circled, say, one of these squares and said we were just going to focus on one of these things, we might not be able to find a lot of improvements. If you set the scope too broadly here, you'll soon feel like you're trying to boil the ocean and you have everybody in your organization to go talk to figure this out. So we recommend folks set their scope to include business activities that you can change, plus a few that you would like to be able to change. Be a little aspirational here, but don't go too far. For the systems that you do put out of scope, for example here, this is work we did with our original data diagnostic effort with Oregon Metro's Natural Areas Program many years ago. And what we did here is help them draw out the scope to focus on initially on their acquisition process, how they report that, and how they track performance measures around that. What we decided not to do was go to figure out and talk to the finance group, who wants to talk to them, right? About how to better manage the data at this point, at this early phase. So we put them out of scope. Now, it's important here to understand how those two interrelate, or these what's in scope interrelates with related business activities outside of the scope. And you want to also define the information flow, but you don't want to actually focus too much effort on the edges here. All right, so with that scope set, we can generate a list of people who operate within these business activities, folks who are interested in this stuff, who we should go talk to, who have jobs or roles within these things. And from there, we start having doing interviews. And it's really important to start with the people here and get their impressions. These are the people that you need to understand in order to deliver an effective plan. And through interviews, you'll ask what their pain points are and what possibilities exist to help them solve their data problems. Be sure to focus on user goals and the user tasks that relate to those user goals. This example here is from our work with U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Salmon Recovery Office in Idaho, CSRO. And the work we did with them identified 4 main, what we call personas. And these personas are important to abstract a little bit away from day-to-day jobs and roles and personify how people interact with data. The reason we do this is to enable and simplify future analysis steps, but it also provides a good grouping of goals here. So project implementers typically have a similar goal to make sure projects are completed successfully. Program trackers, various roles contribute to that to ensure that the program is doing work responsibly on budget and making progress forward. And program monitors require oversight, but could be different roles within that, say partners or general public here in this example. If this seems complex and weird, that's fine. We can talk about this more a little bit later. I'm not going to go into persona development too deeply. I will give a shortcut that we've learned. Typical personas that we use as shorthand here are data providers. These are people who are the source for much of your data, and typically they're producing data in the course of their daily activities. So that's one generic persona you can use to think about if this seems difficult to get to the personas we have here. Another one is consumers. They're folks primarily concerned with using data to complete their data tasks. And then observers. And they're not typically involved with day-to-day details, but need to keep up with progress of your program. Okay, once we get here, well, it's time to start to gather the tasks together that you've discovered through interviewing and use different techniques here to build out your task list. It's also important to start to understand how the various tasks fit together and how the workflows work at a detailed level. So a technique here is to build a user task matrix by persona. I'll show that a little later here. But the gist of this is given a piece of data, metrics in this case, how does a persona interact with that data? So the project implementer from our previous example creates anticipated metrics for each proposed project. So they estimate metrics. Program monitor would review program accomplishments by assessing metrics against objectives defined in the BIOP, the biological opinion that we're addressing here. So that's setting some of our goals. So they actually review metrics. The cool thing about this in this perspective is it lets you walk in the shoes of your users, and it deepens your understanding of what they need to complete their work. And it builds a rapport to help you get them excited about making improvements in their work process in many cases. Some task analysis techniques to think about here are, and you can research some of these on your own. I'm not going to go much deeper there. Workflow analysis, job analysis, task lists and inventories, process analysis, task sequences. You can create task hierarchies, and you can do procedural analysis. Those are different types of techniques that are out there in this workflow improvement space. Okay, I'm going to show a key technique that we use quite frequently, and it's a user task analysis. This helps us come up with a picture of all the different user tasks going on and how people interact with data within a program or an organization. And then it helps us prioritize which ones are most important to think about automating in systems. So the process here is compile all the user tasks together from your interviews that you've completed previously. Set up your team who's going to review these. Ideally, the key folks that you interviewed would be part of this process. And you would review all the tasks with them to make sure they understand. I'll show more details of what the tasks look like here. You create cards for each identified task. And then you do a card sort with key stakeholders. A card sort's a technique where you ask people to make decisions about how important something is, how important a task is on a scale. And so we have two scales that we like to use. You can use others as well. One is criticality. How critical is this task for that person in their job? And frequency. How often is the task performed by the person in their job? And then finally, you compile and report on the results. We've seen some really wonderful conversations and shared understandings come out of this process. So it's fun to experience this with a group that's bought in to working on this. This photo here is from our work with Clean Water Services in their watershed management department. Let's see. So the results of this allow you to start to compile the user tasks and score them on this criticality and frequency dimension. So you can see here, this is a subset of the tasks that were part of the card sort for Bureau of Reclamation. And for each person here, they gave each task a criticality score and a frequency through the card sort. And it allowed us to total up an overall score for each task. This is pretty cool just to get an understanding of how people view their work and what's important to them. You can also connect it to workflow areas or workflows that you defined earlier to connect it to a broader picture of how the organization works together. But what's really cool is the next slide. And if you're thinking about process improvements, you can create a quadrant view here that lets you map each task out on a average criticality scale and an average frequency scale. And what this tells you is stuff up here in the northeast that will be must-have functionality we should consider improving. So that's stuff that we need to make better, we should focus and invest time in, that will help you focus on what's most important to the most people in your organization. The quadrant here in the northwest, good to have. That's stuff that happens frequently but isn't very critical. That allows you to gain efficiency in your work and lowers tedium. So you may consider biting off some of these in your plan. Down here in the southeast are good to have kinds of tasks as well. These are critical, but they don't happen frequently. You might consider including these in your improvement plan to help gain confidence and lower risk. And then the ones down here may not be as important to focus on right away. All right, so that's the user task analysis technique in a nutshell. Any questions? No, okay. All right, moving on.
Can you hear me, Brian?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I didn't hear I just heard what you said. Can you hear me, Brian? Was there a question?
I'm not, you're kind of breaking up for me.
Oh, am I?
But
okay.
Yeah, there was a question. Basically, there's a little bit of delay. The question that I have is kind of regarding this slide. How do you prioritize, what process would an organization use to prioritize these into the must-have, good to have, may not need, or good, or good to gain confidence, the lower good to have?
Which process would somebody follow? Yeah, this is output from this card sort activity that I presented here on this slide. And then we compile the results here, and then we're able to produce a picture like this based on the scoring. So it's the organization, it's the folks in the organization who provide that information. In the past too, we've also done allowed management to have an opinion on what areas they would like to see, so they can put their thumb on the scale a bit at times to help increase the score here or there for things that they know are important from an external perspective. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Am I breaking up too much?
You're sounding good now.
Okay. Okay, so from all that detail, let's zoom out. And zooming out here, you start to focus on the whole workflow, and you can start to map that out in an understandable, simple workflow diagram, or two or three. This example here is just showing data collection in the field and how crews go about acquiring data in the field, how it gets transferred up to a database system for automated processing and QA, how a QA lead in the office goes back through that, and how the database system then generates the metrics automatically. This is another example from our Columbia Habitat Monitoring Program. I'm sure many of us have done workflow diagrams, so I won't spend too much more time on this, but it's a great way to figure out the logical flow of all these tasks and how they work together. Okay, next up is thinking about data. What's most important to track? We call these data here different things. You'll hear me refer to this as data entities. A data entity, for example, here is a site visit, an observation, a project, a user, a rating, a species. Those are different things that we all, nouns that we all talk about in our day-to-day work. Those are the entities that we want to begin to map in our data space here. Ultimately, your data management plan will be about improving the way your program deals with data. And that starts with an efficient map or conceptual data model here. A data model is a diagram that boils down the key information types in your program, your key entities, and illustrates how they relate together. With the data model in hand, you can move on to talking about current and potential systems to help you manage your data, and which systems are responsible for which pieces of the data. We'll get into that here in a little bit. So you can see here an example of users and visits like I just called out, and how they relate together, and which ones are more important and which ones are less important here. So another key technique I just wanted to drill into a bit here is conceptual data modeling. A couple quotes I found about conceptual data modeling that I liked. One can think of it as a visual representation of an organization's data semantics, or a community view of the structure of the work. There's a few elements when doing a conceptual data model. One is a subject area. So what are the themes within your organization? So for example, monitoring activities is the one we're just looking at. An entity, What things do you need to store? So that's a thing that you need to keep track of and store, in this case, a site where we do monitoring. What are attributes? What are the characteristics of those entities? So for a site, we need to know location and landowner are the most important ones. You can fill in the detail later in detailed data models. Conceptual stays at a high level, so we'll just track the most important stuff here. Relationships, how are they related to each other? This is where you start to draw lines between them. So a site has visits, possibly one per year, and then you can start to define constraints. What are the data requirements? So this starts to solidify the relationships and what's required in the attributes when you are filling out one of these entities. So this is a tool that we use. If you've got somebody in your organization who's skilled at data modeling, it's great at this point to pull them in to help you. Or if you've got experience, there are large books about how to do this effectively, and it can be quite fun and rewarding, speaking as a data geek. All right, once we have the model, we understand the workflows, we understand the users using this, the data, we can start to map systems to find opportunities for improvement. I'm sure you already have systems in place that are doing part of, if not most of this work. There may be some gaps where you'd want to define a new system or add on to an existing system. So this is the opportunity where you define different alternatives as to how you go about structuring your systems to best support the data. One key concept here I'll dive into in a second is which data is managed in which systems. So that's called single source of record or single source of truth. You want to make sure that people aren't getting different answers when they're running a report for one system as to when they're running a report out of a different system, as an example of why that's important. You also want to define and understand the interactions between systems here and how those interrelate. And this is the data that flows between and which system's responsible for each piece of that data. One key concept to talk about is system of record. System of record is the authoritative source for a given data entity. It's the place where an entity is maintained. What we call in the biz is create, update, and delete, or CRUD. It's where the write operations happen to the information or the data. You can have more than one system be a system of record, but you don't want an entity spread across multiple systems if you can help it. If you are doing that, there's some techniques to deal with it, but it takes more work. For each group of related entities, be uber clear which one is the system of record. And when thinking through this, you can think too about the kind of tools that are appropriate, what kind of systems are appropriate for the kind of data we're working with and who's working with it. So we take system here in a loose term. It could be anything from paper or spreadsheets up to complex web applications, handheld devices, etc. But what we find is if it's a small number of people CRUDing and they're working on paper or spreadsheets, it could be a good system of record as long as reporting capability is manual, analysis capability required is minimal, and you don't need a lot of transparency with that information. Access databases or complex spreadsheets can support 1 to 2 people updating the data. It helps automate the reporting capability. It does provide some analysis capability, minimal transparency to stakeholders. Internal databases helps when a lot of people need to get in there and update data. Provides for a lot of reporting capability. Good analysis capability for internal staff only, however, it doesn't support stakeholder transparency very well. Databases exposed on the web have many of the same attributes of internal databases, but it does allow you to connect and leverage that data across the web and be transparent with stakeholders. As you all know, though, there's also a cost increase as you go down this list and implement systems further down this list. All right, that's systems and a good technique to assign responsibility to systems and how they relate together. Questions?
We have a question that came in during the quadrant slide. Let me kind of just bring up. It was basically the task analysis, not process analysis. Is that?
Yeah. So process analysis is a formalized technique used in traditional business analysis. So that's going through an entire process and understanding it in great detail. You know, to me, that's kind of rooted in manufacturing process analysis. We feel task analysis is a bit lighter weight. It's more an interview style. And then it also engages key users in helping to prioritize what's important. That's the main difference I see between those two, if that was the question.
They also asked, they kind of clarified a little bit more. How long does the task analysis take?
We've seen them take anywhere from a week to 2 months. It depends on your scope, how many folks you need to go talk to. You can do one pretty quickly if you have everybody in a room, and the scope is constrained. If it's a wider scope with a broader set of people that you need to go talk to, or maybe they're geographically dispersed, so there's some travel involved, that can take more time. But yeah, depends on your situation, but we've seen it go a week to 2 months.
Thank you.
Okay, from here, let's come back and pull it together. So we've gone through all the different areas of analysis. Let's build a data management strategy now. Very critical that we prioritize our work. You know, I very much believe in incremental improvements, and the most valuable next steps should be prioritized over less valuable steps. Lets you control how much you spend, how much effort you put into it. It also builds support in your organization that you're doing the right thing when people see concrete improvements. So an example here from Bureau of Reclamation work are a number of deliverables. We packaged up related user tasks, and based on the priority of those user tasks, we set the priority of the deliverables here. We were also able to tie back to the personas to say, okay, once we implement this deliverable and you make these improvements, you'll be able to benefit the trackers, for example. And they decided to put these into phase A, and then put these into phase B, and put these into phase C, and that gave them flexibility as to how they budgeted and worked through this improvement effort. All right, once you get through that and you define the chunks of work that you want to do, you start to transition into focusing on implementation. That's another 3-hour webcast I'll be doing next week. No, just kidding. We'll get to that later. All right, so let's pull it all together. I like to provide some advice here to keep it concise. Be as visual as you can. I've seen large documents of data management strategies linger on shelves for many years. People point at it but forget what's in it. Keep it action-oriented, business value-driven, as I mentioned earlier. Keep it iterative and accessible to manager types. So here's a completed one. That the example here is the Bureau of Reclamation example, and this is what we produced for them during our data diagnostic. And you can see kept it very high level, very visual, and you can recognize some of these elements from the techniques that we explored here. Can be a daunting task, but it is a valuable exercise, and strongly encourage folks to work on it. Long-term results, we've seen many benefits from the groups that we've worked with on this. Explicit data management is critically important. A plan is important, and here's some quotes from folks who have experienced the benefits of this kind of analysis. All right.
Well, thank you, Brian. While, if any of you have questions, please use the Q&A console at the bottom. We can ask your particular question to Brian. Also, I know on the next slide, there is a link out to our USBR case study. We did, Sitka did a data diagnostic with them, and I think reading that document would kind of provide a little bit more insight as well, which might be valuable to you all. Like we have a few more minutes remaining. So I'm not seeing any questions at this time, but Brian, do you want to maybe give a little heads up on about these resources that you're providing?
Yeah. So step-by-step getting started guide is available. Let me know if you'd like to see that. The open standards that I mentioned earlier, you can go out to cmpopenstandards.org. I think it's good to have some frameworks here to lean on. Structured decision making is included in that. There's an article, card sorting to discover the user model of the information space. That's what we leveraged to build our user task analysis techniques I shared earlier. And then conceptual data modeling explained. There's a quick YouTube video out there if you're curious about another perspective on how that works.